Thank you very much for joining this session. This is a NEXUS Gains webinar. It's actually the 29th and final NEXUS Gains webinar. NEXUS Gains is wrapping up at the end of this year. We hope that next year it will transform into something called NEXUS Policy Gains. But for this current phase of NEXUS Gains, this is the last webinar that we're going to do. We have a very exciting lineup. And we're talking about water in a heated world. So as we know, global temperatures are continuing to rise. We saw yesterday, I saw in the press that 2024 is on track to be the hottest year ever. And the impacts on water resources are becoming increasingly evident. Today's session is going to focus on the critical connection between climate change and water availability. Across the globe, we're seeing an acceleration of the hydrological cycle, leading to more intense water scarcity and an increase in extreme events, so that's floods and droughts. And in 2023, many regions faced severe droughts, while others endured catastrophic flooding, which is basically highlighting the unpredictable and dangerous effects of our changing climate. And these trends have continued in 2024. So in a world where we can no longer rely on traditional weather patterns, we must rethink how we manage water, right, which is perhaps our most valuable natural resource. And today's discussions will explore shifts in precipitation patterns, rising evaporation rates, and the growing frequency of extreme weather events that threaten both the quantity and the quality of fresh water. This webinar is also going to emphasize why NEXUS approaches, so integrating technical, policy, and societal strategies, are crucial to building climate resilience and achieving effective adaptation. And we're also going to delve into the outcomes from the recent UNFCCC COP29, focusing on the water-related discussions and policies that occurred there. And we have a review of important research on water management for both climate change mitigation and adaptation. So the format that we have today, we have three very eminent speakers. They're each going to give short presentations of between 8 and 10 minutes. This will be followed by reflections from two distinguished panelists who are going to share their insights on the presentations. And then we're going to conclude with a brief Q&A. So please feel free to add any questions you might have into the Q&A feature, and if there's time at the end, we'll go through those questions, and those questions can be either to the panelists or to the presenters. So we'll make a start. I'll just briefly introduce. I'm going to introduce each of the speakers as we go along. But the first speaker today is Stefan Uhlenbrock. He's actually a former lead of NEXUS Gains, of the NEXUS Gains Initiative. He was at IMI when NEXUS Gains started, and he developed and led the program. So he knows a lot about the initiative. He also has a deep understanding, of course, of why NEXUS issues are so important. He's currently Director of Hydrology, Water and Cryosphere at the World Meteorological Organization, and he was a lead author on the State of Global Water Resources report for 2023. And he's going to give a brief presentation on the findings from that report. So over to you, Stefan. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Matthew. Colleagues, a pleasure being here. I still remember when we set up this NEXUS Gains series, which was during COVID times back in 2021, I believe, with Matthew and Claudia Ringler. Of course, we set it up, and we were also working from home, and that maybe didn't change so drastically for some of us. But now I'm very happy to be here at the last seminar. Stefan Uhlenbrock, yes, I'm with the World Meteorological Organization. The title was A Heated World, and I thought I'd kind of bring a little bit of the background. What does it mean for our global water resources? That's what I want to talk about. Matthew said it already. The global temperature is escalating very rapidly. These are the 5 or 6, best temperature records that WMO compiles, but taken from these various organizations, and then we put this together to make global estimates for the temperature. And you see, well, there's a bit of deviation in earlier records, but overall the pattern is very clear. It's the warmest year, and probably we are approaching or have maybe even during some part of last year even exceeded the 1.5 degree temperature. global mean temperature. But for us hydrologists, it's not only the air temperature which is so important, which I always stress. It's the overall energy in the system, which is also illustrated, for instance, in the ocean heat. And you see here various records from ocean heat contents, and always compared to an average from the last 15 years or so. And you see that also the temperature in the oceans is increasing very rapidly, with huge implication for our precipitation patterns. We analyzed, since just the third report just came out now, so since a bit of two more years, we compiled the global state of water resources, which is basically a kind of the global hydrological yearbook, where we compile a lot of data and try to assess the global water resources. And we always take the last year, so the October, we published the report from the previous year, because it takes us so much time to compile the data and to get the data from the various organizations. And then we summarize that in a couple of figures. And it really raised a lot of interest. So our press officer was very happy last year. This year in October, we got more than 2,500 articles in various media outlets referring to this report when we launched in early October. So there's a lot of interest. People see that climate change is, of course, the change of the climatic conditions, which includes the state of water resources. There's a lot of interest. Also at the COP, we gave a couple of presentations on some of the results. We try to analyze all the different components of the water cycle dynamics. I don't want to go into too much details here. I think the audience knows very well about it. And I will concentrate on the river discharge and show a little bit of groundwater data in this presentation today. If you just take the monitoring stations, and this is the data that we got in time. Yes, there's many more stations around the world, I understand that. But if the ones which we got in time with updated rating curves for the year 2023, compare with the previous 30 years, they are either above or below average. And roughly, the darker the red, the drier the year was compared to the previous 30 years, or the darker the blue, or the greenish, darker green, means the wetter it is. What you see here, first, a very unequal distribution, hardly any gauging stations in Africa, Latin America, and large parts of Asia. Quite a number in many parts of Europe and in North America. So therefore, doing this report on gauge data only is impossible. Therefore, we do use models. And the next figure, I show you a summary of the 10 best operational global hydrological models. They all run on a daily basis. They all simulate a standard period from 30 years of 91 to 2020. And then we took the last 3 years, always compared with the previous 30 years. So how wet and how dry is it? So what you're looking at, these stripes, every year is one stripe. Blue means it's wetter than normal for the river discharge. Yellow means it's drier than normal. And what you can see in the last 5 years, that the area around the world that behaved normal, so where the stream flow in the rivers, where in the normal range means between the 25 and 75% percentile, it's getting smaller and smaller. So the rivers become either much wetter or much drier. Interesting is also, if you just look at the last year, we never had such dry conditions. That means the heat, which Matthew said it, and I showed the temperature record. So the warmth and the heat in the atmosphere is translated to dry rivers on average. Again, these are all river discharge of the whole world averaged in one stripe. So it's a very aggregated data set. But it is so remarkable that almost half of the planet, the rivers in half of the planet, were drier than normal, and we never had that for the 33 years where we had consistent input data. So that is already quite interesting. So the heat and of the atmosphere translate to dry rivers. Also, if you look at this figure, which is more on the spatial, this is the mean annual discharge. And you see here some couple of interesting parts of the world. Generally, half of the planet is drier than normal, almost half. Few basins are only in the normal range. And you see a couple of interesting areas here in the southwest of the United States. You might remember the Colorado River in the southwest of the US, and I put this in for John Matthew, this figure. He lives in this area somewhere. It was an almost 10-year drought in the southwest of the US. And this in 2023 seems to be over. And that is interesting because after almost 10 years, always much below average, the year was actually relatively wet. Why was it so wet? And that's when I would have more time, Matthew, next time, please, and show you the snow data we have. There was record snow records in the Rocky Mountains. We were up to 30 feet of snow in some parts of the Rockies. Of course, all that snow during the winter 22-23 melted at one stage, became stream flow, and you see this translated in the river. Also, there was a persistent drought in the Greater Horn of Africa, Somalia, Ethiopia, and that area. And that is also in 2023, you had rather wet conditions. So the 5 years of drought, which had huge implication for food security and migration and displacement of people and all that. And in streamflow record is interesting, 2023 was wetter. Why that change? Till the mid of 2023, we had so-called La Nina conditions in the Pacific Ocean, and that swapped in the middle of the year around July to an El Nino condition. El Nino usually is connected to changes in the precipitation pattern, which then translate also in streamflow patterns. And we see that in Somalia, we see that in the southwest of Australia, and we did not see that in parts of Latin America, where the drought in the southern part of Latin America moved northwards. So you see this here in large parts of Brazil and northern part of South America. Also, this resulted in lower than average inflows into reservoirs. This is only the artificial river storage in reservoirs. We only took the big reservoirs, and you see here a lot of orange dots around the world. I rounded up. I don't want to speak about mean flow only. While we had on average a very dry year, we also had a period of a lot of extreme events. Here are some pictures also from more recent 2024 events, but there's almost hardly any week where you don't see in the news somewhere about exceptional flooding. There was this year's major flooding in Valencia and also in North Carolina and in other parts. And in 2023, you see here we had a number of major flood events also in, for instance, the Libya flood is maybe something you remember, where we had in some stations more than 400 millimeters of rainfall in a single day in September, in a region where usually, if there's rainfall in northern Libya, then it's only the period somewhere in November to February, but not in September. And then more than 400 millimeters in a single day is an exceptional amount of event. Where does that come from? And now back to my early slide, I talked about record temperature in the oceans. So the very warm Mediterranean Sea caused a lot of additional evaporation and also caused, from a meteorological point of view, to conditions which were equal to tropical cyclones, which you do not have in the Med Sea normally, but the record temperature in the oceans, the warm and more moisture holding capacity of a warmer atmosphere then can lead to more intense rainfall, which we see in many parts of the world. And also the major flooding in Dubai in April earlier this year is also linked to very warm record temperature in the oceans. Groundwater, the last figure I wanted to show you, due to the collaboration with IGREC, they collected more than 36,000 groundwater records, which are all summarized in one figure. And here you see a couple of countries where you also see many countries are the levels were drier than normal. Obviously, this is not only climatic control, but in many cases even more so because of human abstractions. These were a few results which I wanted to show you today to kick off the discussion on how is it in a heated atmosphere, in a heated climate. And thank you so much. Over to you, Matthew.
Great. Thank you very much, Stefan. Excellent presentation and some very clearly worrying trends in the state of the global hydrology. Thanks very much for that. We're now going to go over to John Matthews. I think many of you know him, but he's the Executive Director of the Alliance for Global Water Adaptation, or AGWA. He's played a pivotal role, I'd say, in ensuring that water is recognised as as being central to building resilience to climate change. And John, he's worked more than anybody else I know probably on trying to get water into the negotiations and the discussions around climate change. And he's going to reflect now on the history of water with within the UNFCCC process, and hopefully share some key takeaways from the recent COP29. So with that, over to you, John. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much for that kind introduction, Matthew. This is an image from an event that AGWA and other groups participated in at the last COP in Baku. Just as a kind of, if you've never been to a COP, a little bit of what it looks like on the ground. This actually was a very wasn't a water themed event, but it was a water was actually a kind of structuring force in it. I want to talk today a little bit about, from my perspective, over the last 18 years or so, where I've seen water evolve in the climate policy space. And just for reference, uh, uh, like Stefan, I'm a climate scientist. I'm an aquatic ecologist, actually, by training. But I've really come to feel like policy is an important part of my scientific work, and really engaging with policy audiences in that space. My first COP was Copenhagen. It was in 2009. And my conclusion from spending what ended up being about a month in a very cold, a very dark a Danish city is that climate policy is completely desiccated. And one of my telling memories is that Lula was president of Brazil at that time as well, actually, and he sent a massive delegation, about 600 people from the Brazilian government, to the Copenhagen COP. And I was in an event, and that was about why water might be relevant to climate policy. Still a really new idea then. And one member of the audience stood up and he said, "I'm part of the Brazilian delegation, one of 600, and I'm the only one here who is asked to track water issues." So there's a big change from 2024 to 2009. And I want to talk a little bit about what the shape of that looks like over time. Now, if we think about climate policy, probably the most important instrument that we need to think about are the NDCs, the nationally determined contributions, and they have two primary components. They have a mitigation section, of course, focused largely on carbon sequestration or emissions, and then an adaptation section focused hopefully on de-risking, as well as the kind of higher standard of resilience. And in the first generation of NDCs, they launched in 2021. About 80% of NDCs mentioned water. Now, how did they mention them? They mostly talked about water as a hazard, essentially all the things that you saw in Stefan's talk. Why water is a problem, floods and droughts are like that. That literally, that phrase is probably the most used phrase in the COP process. A second kind of large clump of issues that come up is talking about water as a sector. So this is how we pump, pipe, treat, store water. It's a lot of it's about utilities to some degree. It's starting to become a little bit more about the kind of SDG 6 access issues. But actually, I think, you know, there was a lot of kind of crowing from the kind of self-congratulation in the water community with this first generation of NDCs that water was mentioned. But actually, I don't think it was that significant, because those water is a hazard and water is a sector. Yeah, it's important, but what we really want to be able to do is talk about water as a connector, and not just thinking about a single sector, but how water spans a lot of critical sectors: energy, agriculture, cities, ecosystems, health, and particularly a newer idea around water resilience. So it's not just traditional water knowledge, what we've been really trying to accrue and develop over the past 30 years or so, but maybe over the last 5 or 10 years, what is the climate change aspect of it? How do we manage things under dynamic conditions? There's a lot of words here, but I'm gonna hit some highlights. I really feel like we need to stop thinking about climate change as kind of a separate area. Actually, in my view, the SDGs are kind of declining in importance and relevance, and climate policy, especially NDCs, are really rising very actively and rapidly. They are essentially becoming the new tools for economic development. And there are a lot of reasons for that. But one of the biggest is that finance and funding of all kinds is starting to reference and tie into and integrate with indices and to some degree NAPs as well, national adaptation plans. And a big component of that is this idea of a climate narrative. So in my experience, one of the really interesting trends over the past year, and it's only about the past year, is that businesses in the private sector are very actively, very interested in indices and NAPs and how they can integrate with them. They see climate policy now as essential in many cases to their business operations. Has there been progress over time from the state of complete desiccation in 2009? There has been a slow hydration that has occurred of COP. Cancun was the COP immediately after Copenhagen. There was a major water event. We organized it with the World Bank. It was literally 25 kilometers outside of the venue. And I think that was a pretty good demonstration of where water sort of stood in proximity to the COP. But slowly we've moved in. The Paris Agreement 2015 is another really important day. Actually, today is the anniversary of the Paris Agreement. A day I always keep marked in my calendar, something I feel really excited about. And it's when NDCs were created, this kind of new, really bottom-up, national scale approach to thinking about climate problems. The following year was the first official water day. It was called a water day, but ironically, it was about 90 minutes. It was I think like a signal transformation. It was the official recognition by the UNFCCC that water was important thematically for both mitigation and adaptation. And it also was the launch of the very ugly acronym of the MPGCA, the Marrakesh Partnership for Global Climate Action. And that essentially, I think, is when a lot of really positive development started to occur in the COP process. It's when non-state actors were finally given kind of a process and a format for being able to engage in negotiation and the COP process more broadly. Also, to give a sense of like how water has kind of shifted in its presence in Madrid, 2019. Our policy director at Agua, Ingrid Timbo, and I, we organized roughly 30 water events, kind of scattered all across the floor of the COP. By Glasgow, there were in 2021 there were over 150, and probably over 200. We really lost track of all of the water-related, water-themed events. A signal part of that was the introduction of the water pavilion. I think we should be maybe a little. It was important, but I think primarily it's been a way for socializing the water community about climate issues, rather than necessarily socializing the climate community about water issues. It also, I think, marked a transition point when mitigation started to lose some of its primacy in the COP process, and middle and lower income countries really became very visibly, very audibly frustrated that decarbonization was important, yes, but that's only about slowing down climate impacts. What we need to actually focus on now for most of humanity is adaptation resilience, and that automatically leads us to talking a lot more about water resources. Sharm was kind of disappointing, but maybe important that it was where we first started to hear about the global goal in adaptation. Hopefully that comes up later, because it is very important. Dubai was a massive COP. It was last year, and notable that year was also, but a little bit lost in the invasion of Ukraine, because it launched at the same time with IPCC AR6. Was this phrase water-based adaptation as an IPCC term that actually adaptation really needed to use water in this kind of deep thematic way. Also, the freshwater challenge was announced. Hopefully that also comes up later. That's mostly about freshwater landscapes and particularly mitigation, the kind of freshwater carbon linkage on those landscapes. It's been funded now and is starting to become more operational. Baku, a few weeks ago, a month ago, we started to see serious preparations for the second generation of NDCs that will launch officially next year, in very active, even tense negotiations over the global goal and adaptation. I've just come from Brazil, and my hopes are that actually we may see from Brazil a much higher level of kind of a thematic approach to water. So I'm excited about that. A big point that I want to say to people who identify as water listeners, I think of myself now as a resilient scientist. That we shouldn't be so smug in water. Actually, like there's a lot of work that we need to do, and there's a lot that we need to really learn from, and to become interoperable with the climate community. They are the larger agenda. And also, going to COP should not be about tourism. It's not just about events. It's really about a deep alignment in priorities. There are initiatives that are in this space that are very active. We're doing some work with EMI, for instance, that's trying to bring a kind of a thematic water approach to NDCs called the Water Resilience Tracker. And I thank you for the chance to talk to you all today. I appreciate it.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, John. Good to see how water has hydrated the COPs and the UNFCCC process. That's really excellent. Thank you very much indeed. And now we'll move on to the final of the three presentations. Darshini Ravindrathna is a leader of IMI's research group on climate policies, finance and processes. And she's going to discuss the vital role of research in advancing climate change mitigation and adaptation strategies related specifically to water, and particularly in relation to water security. So over to you, Darshini. Thank you.
Thanks, Matthew. Thank you. I'm going to talk a little bit, as Matthew said, about water security, for food security in the context of climate change. So if we can move on to the next slide, please. Thank you. I think the 5 problems that should keep us all up at night are essentially hunger, water insecurity, climate risks, poverty and exclusion, uncertainty, ecosystem breakdown. At the center of all of these is the climate crisis. We've heard time and again that climate crisis is primarily a water crisis, and climate change essentially exacerbates all of these other challenges. Climate-induced changes in water resource systems, they impact economies, they impact food systems, cities, energy, health, ecosystems, and importantly, the security of our communities. Particularly marginal farmers and those disconnected from water infrastructure are particularly at risk. So I think shifting water availability requires solutions and services that harness some of the advances in research and technologies and policies and finance. So at IMI, if we move on to the next slide. At IMI, we've got sort of a brand new shiny strategy that takes us to 2030, and our strategic framework is essentially centered on climate, but structured around 3 strategic focus areas and 4 transformational levers. And through research and partnerships, we look to achieve outcomes under each of these 3 areas. And our 7-year strategy, the primary aim is to contribute to increase water security for those who need it the most. And now I'll talk through sort of some of the innovations that our research. IMI is a research for development organization, and some of the innovations and the work that we do that have supported development of these strategic focus areas essentially. So the first one I'll be talking about is mitigating water risks. Next slide, please. And the next. Thank you. So under this solution, so with climate change essentially increasing the frequency of extreme weather events, unreliable rainfall, unseasonal rainfall, farmers and communities are faced with, climate that sways between droughts and floods. Communities already understand the risks that their water systems face due to climate change. No one knows the value of water more than someone who walks miles every day to fetch it. But there's a need to quantify and demonstrate this risk to policymakers and implementers and to communities as well, so that they are better prepared for the increasing risks that, their systems face. So at IMI, for instance, we have digital models and databases where we work to better understand and communicate drought and flood risk to communities and embed these sort of tools as support for policymakers. We also, for instance, work on sustainably managing water, energy, and climate interlinkages, example, through the promotion of solar irrigation pumps, identifying the role of technology such as solar in climate, not just sort of mitigating emissions, but also promoting climate resilience and livelihoods through diversification of livelihoods, increased profit when they wouldn't have had it, among others. In projects like Rewater MENA, we draw on experience through water reuse strategies that feed off traditional knowledge that's already developed in the region. And the project looks at promising innovations of reuse models, mapping it against not just, climate change, but also cultural barriers, institutional barriers, regulations, and so on. Under anticipatory action, we look at early warning, early action, early finance. We have platforms that promote effective response to climate hazards. We can move on to the next slide. I'll now look at the second, which is which is overcoming global inequalities. Under this, I think importantly, it's very important to ensure and look separately sometimes at the impacts of climate, especially in the water and food sectors, on women, marginal farmers. What are the problems that they face, and how can we overcome them through research? So we work on a lot of economic and impact assessments. For example, in the wash sector in Nepal, we've done vulnerability assessments of water infrastructure and facilities to climatic hazards such as landslides, among others. We've looked specifically at gendered and social vulnerabilities that relate to the wash sector and climate change experienced by diverse groups of women, girls, people with disabilities, and marginalized communities. And again, we've made sure that the digital tools that I spoke about earlier that we've developed are also accessible by these communities. With the CGIAR, we also work on a number of initiatives like accelerating inclusive agribusiness in East and Southern Africa, where we look at resilience and inclusive agricultural initiatives, where we train cohorts of agricultural entrepreneurs like women. And through this, they're able to diversify their livelihoods, which again provides them with another sort of barrier against climate change by improving their resilience to climate change. Next slide, please. Next one. And in managing water sustainably, we work essentially through a number of different programs to make sure that we are mapping the state of water across a number of countries, providing governments with this information, like I said, and also doing a lot of capacity building training on the ground with farmers, with technicians, and others who are also sort of implementers and middlemen. Just an example is the DIVASA, which is a distributed intelligent water allocation for sustainable agriculture. It's a basin to boundary approach that generates water data at multiple scales across continental Africa. And we're already at phase 2, and it aims to develop and implement advanced water allocation strategies to optimize water use efficiency. All of this, again, it supports climate mitigation, but importantly also supports communities in building resilience to climate change. We also look at things like creating digital twins of water basins. In India, we've done a water productivity atlas that helps policymakers formulate targeted strategies that optimize the impacts across the sectors while mapping against the uncertainties to climate change. And, we collaborate with a number of ministries and a number of our projects as well to ensure that we're incorporating their feedback into some of the tools that we develop. Next slide, please. Thank you. In addition to this, I think through all of the research work that we do, we always look for impact. And we do this through organizing large forums. For instance, there was a global science policy forum with over 250 policymakers, scientists from across the world to talk about the work that we've done on solar irrigation. And these are sort of not just places to exchange, findings and results of our work, but also to look at what we can do in the future. What sort of research areas do we need to collaborate on while taking into consideration some of the growing risks that different communities face? Complementing some of the amazing words that John Matthews just said, we work a lot with party delegations, especially over the last 2 COPs, where we work with negotiators. Our researchers are part of these party delegations in a number of countries. AGNES is what I've put here, which are the African group of negotiators, and we support them, particularly in bringing out the importance of water in climate change negotiations. But in addition to AGNES, we've done this in Nepal, we've done this in Sri Lanka, we've done this in Jordan, a number of countries already, and our sort of footprint in this space is only growing, which is nice to see, because it's like I said, we always look to the impact of our research. Last slide, we can just go. So finally, I think through some of the work that we've done, IMI's approach to sort of planning for climate in general at different sort of scales is thinking that accommodates the growing uncertainties within and between sectors, of which climate change is a huge part. We look towards knowledge development that brings technical solutions that are linked with political and economic incentives, and develop them within the social and environmental context in which we're studying. And through digital modeling, solutions are designed in a way to manage the trade-offs of when, where, who, and how water is allocated in the context of the growing uncertainties that we're faced with. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Darshini. Excellent presentation, just showing a lot of the research that IMI's doing. As Darshini said, we always want to have impact through our research, and we always work with partners in all the countries that we're working. So very great presentation. Thanks. So with that concludes the 3 presentations that we have. If you have any questions, can I remind you to put them in the Q&A? We'll try and get to those at the end. And I think some of them are being answered as we speak with typed answers. But now we're going to move on to the 2 panelists. We have 2 esteemed panelists who are going to reflect on what they've heard. So first of all, I'm going to ask Jianfu Liu, who's an independent consultant. She was formerly with the Asian Development Bank, where she was a climate change adaptation specialist. And she brings over 20 years of experience of climate science and policy. And she's going to share now her valuable perspectives on the intersection of science and policy in water management. So over to you, Jianfu. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Matthew. And thank you also to the really inspiring and informative contributions from the speakers. And I just want to quickly maybe share a few points from what I've heard, and then, hopefully have some more discussion at the end from, the participants. So just want to quickly reflect on what Stefan reported, through the State of the Water report. I just want to highlight one thing, that map he presented at the beginning of his presentation. Those dots are just so unevenly distributed across the globe, and it's so concentrated in the developed countries. So to get a good picture of what is really going on, we need to vastly expand the dots across developing country regions. And for that, I would say to do with the support the international community provides in this space, the global observatory system and monitoring network, and in that particular area. Through my work, I've spent most of my time in the past 20 years or so with the multilateral development banks. And over there, my experience is that if you don't really internalize this kind of investments, within the national budgets, it's very difficult to sustain whatever donor funded projects, put in hydrological, meteorological monitoring systems and so on. Once the projects are over, there's no budget for maintenance. There's no budget for technical training. The operating cost is not really set aside. So that is really one thing I think the donor community needs to address. On to Matthew's presentation, John Matthews, sorry. The evolution you highlighted is very inspiring. And I remember I also spent many years within the UNFCCC Secretariat. That's where I first met John, I believe. So at the very early stage of the process, and the water community has been very, always been very determined and very resilient to raise the profile of the water issues onto the COP agenda. And you have been very successful, have dedicated water days, have water everywhere in the COP decision text now. So what I want to highlight is really we need to move away to transition now to move from the awareness reason assessment planning to seriously finance and deliver and implement those actions. It's water-based adaptation or water as a collector. So we need to seriously now move to implement for implementation. And for that, I would highlight that what we do, how do we, again, this is also relevant to what Darshini presented in terms of the, really very impressive cutting edge research IMI has been doing. How do we actually synthesize these insights and research results into, policy maker relevant for sure, but also we want to think about practitioners. How do we service them? How do we equip them with the knowledge they can actually deploy directly in the financing decision making? So I work with these multilateral banks, and one of the very, very real challenge in terms of technical details is, so they develop lots of finance, lots of infrastructure projects, many of them in the water sector, whether it's water supply, wastewater treatment, or it's urban flooding management. So all these projects involve water, and they wanted to make sure they are resilient to future climate change impacts. But to do that, the engineers, in the design, the drainage system, and the investment team, when they do the economics analysis, how do we price in the kind of climate risks? How do we evaluate the resilience built into the project design? So this kind of information is really vital for action to be taken, but they are not quite there yet. So the information is not available or not available in the usable format or the right framing. So a lot of this still needs to be strengthened, and one of the key elements is the KPIs. I think John mentioned in the global goal on adaptation, and I think there is a bit of development in the recent COP. Water resources is one of the GJ themes, and so hopefully what we feel through the MDBs is that if we can get the ministries to put this climate resilience key, the key performance indicators into the budgetary allocation, and to measure the success and the performance against those deliverables, around climate resilience, whether it's in the water resource sector or it's some other cross-cutting areas. So we need to have this kind of practical information to really push the implementation. And this kind of indicators are important. So a lot of banks now trying to develop these new financing instruments or modalities. They have to, let's say, results-based lending. So they have to make sure they see the results before they can disperse the concessional loan or grants. So these are the sort of reflections I have in terms of the presentations. I thoroughly enjoyed hearing. I will stop here. Back to you, Matthew.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jan, for very excellent insights that you gave us, particularly around the need for expanding data collection. I think that's really important, and then moving, of course, into action and changing from policy actually through to practitioners, finance, and decision making, etc. So thank you very much for that. Really, very useful. And now the final panelist is Claudia, who, as many of you probably know, is actually the co-lead of NEXUS Gains. She's the Unit Director for Natural Resources and Resilience at IFPRI. She's going to provide insights into what she's heard, particularly the nexus between water, food, and resilience, drawing on her extensive experience of this topic. Over to you, Claudia.
Yeah, anyway, I'm really very happy to be here. I guess as part of this NEXUS Gains family, with Stefan, the first lead, and Matthew, and everyone else who presented today. I think it's great to see how the information and knowledge has grown, the number of tools and solutions has increased, and there is now much more push also on the finance side. So I think we're definitely moving in the right direction, but of course, certainly not fast enough given the extreme and increasingly extreme situation that we see on the climate water front, including with what Stefan has presented us. I just want to make remarks of 1 or 2 minutes because we have so many excellent questions, including on what are the 2 to 3 frontier research topics, that CGIAR and others should undertake. So I think we have to get back to our speakers. So I just want my 2-3 minutes remarks I want to again use one of the frameworks that NEXUS Gains has developed recently with focus on groundwater governance, and that is the knowledge, motivation, and agency framework. And so we have heard, I think, both from Stefan, but also from Darshini, and also from Xianfu, the importance of collecting data, providing information, and transferring data and information into knowledge. So if we don't have the knowledge that about these the growing number and intensity of extreme events, both floods and droughts, especially this drying of rivers that we have seen globally, if we don't have that knowledge, we certainly will never get into action, and there's no motivation to act upon this. And I think this was also a bit reflected in John's presentation in terms of the very slow onset recognition of the watery impacts of climate change. And Copenhagen was also my first COP. So it's great. We have something in common. And I was actually doing a session on climate smart agriculture where irrigation was included, but yes, it wasn't themed as a water event, more agriculture, and there is simply no agriculture without water. And so, but it's great to see. So knowledge, I think we have done a lot in NEXUS Gains, but there are lots of other movements to improve knowledge on water. And I think we still have a lot to do. And again, would be great to hear where you see the one frontier in that area. Then we have motivation, intrinsic and extrinsic. So why would anyone act upon this knowledge? So intrinsic is because we want to preserve, say, our agricultural systems for future generations. We want to retain clean water resources or drinking water. And extrinsic knowledge because countries understand that this challenge is growing, affecting food security, affecting energy security, affecting ecosystem health, and of course, water security. And so what regulations, what subsidies, what incentives do we see countries implementing as a result? And again, Nexus Gains and other partners have worked a lot on this area, but among the knowledge, motivation, and agency area, I see that still as the largest gap. So we have enough knowledge to act, to generate much more motivation for change, but we have not sufficiently worked in this area. And finally, agency, finance frameworks, moving money through implementing adaptation objectives, the global goal and adaptation, the loss and damage framework, loss and damage funding, NDCs, and of course many other private, public, and farmer investments. I think they're accelerating in response to the knowledge and to the motivation that we see. But I think we need to strengthen motivation yet further through improving knowledge and through improving intrinsic and extrinsic motivation of all actor groups. So that's governments, farmers, transboundary river basin committees to try to catch up with this rapidly growing threat. And I'd like to leave it at that because we have this incredible list of questions. Thanks so much.
Great, thank you very much, Claudia. Yes, I think you're talking about the same real thing, moving from knowledge through motivation to agency, as Jan-Fu was saying. How do we actually translate science and research and understanding actually into practical on-the-ground investments and decision-making? So thanks very much for that. Yes, as Claudia said, there's a lot of questions. We have very little time left, but I'm going to pick out the one that she mentioned, which comes from Jenny Barron. And I wondered if the panelists, the presenters, could maybe just give us what they think would be a priority science area to move forward. So something that will perhaps really change things so that we can move more to actually practical implementation. And I'll start with you, Stefan, if that's okay, just very quickly, because we've only got another 7 minutes. Stefan, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks, Jenny, also for the excellent question. I'm sure there's many science questions related to that. Biased as we all are, I put my emphasis on understanding systems, and I believe more investments and really more innovations are needed to better understand the WEFI resources of water, energy, food, and their interactions. So by better observing, better monitoring systems, only systems that we understand, that we can monitor, we can also manage. So therefore, the combination of the latest satellite remote sensing, and there's really exciting developments happening there, at least for hydrology, for big rivers, with the SWAT satellite, for instance. But also this must be accompanied by innovations on the ground and better monitoring on the ground, and that includes the biophysical resources, but also more innovations. I think Darshini was briefly speaking about this, if I understood it right. Also understanding human interactions on that, through maybe big data analysis, also kind of analyzing data sets with AI and other methods which we couldn't analyze before, and bring this together. So if we better monitor and understand the system dynamics across these different domains, that is one of the research questions I feel is important. Over.
Yeah, great. And I think we've been saying the same thing for ever since I've been in hydrology. We've been saying we need more data, we need more information, and yet investment in data and data collection actually, maybe it's beginning to increase now, but for many years it was going down. Anyway, great, thank you very much. And now over to John. What would you say would be your priority for science?
I'm going to disagree with Stefan and maybe Claudia a little bit. I think data is important, but the most important data that we need is from the future. And we don't have that data. I think that a lot of the trends analyses, actually, we tend to fetishize data in the water community a little bit too much, and think that trends are smooth when actually the curves are going in strange directions and strange patterns, and sometimes it can be led astray. I think that. One of the biggest challenges is that we express our water work through the language and tools of economics, and economics itself has a multi-century bias towards focusing on efficiency, and resilience is not efficiency. Resilience is about flexibility and being robust and preparing for new and emerging conditions that are very difficult to predict. What Darshini's presentation called deep uncertainty, and I think that at both a macroeconomic level and at a microeconomic level, project level, one of the most difficult challenges that we face is actually how we value, through the language of economics, a resilience as a new and emergent quality. Thanks.
Great, thank you very much. And I know there is a lot of research being done on how to understand deep uncertainty and move forward. I mean, we've always had to deal with uncertainty, but it of course is intensifying. Darshini, over to you. Any quick last thoughts on your priority research areas?
I would say finance. So, as scientists, I think we tend to think about finance as something that the other people need to do, like, in water, in the water sector, particularly. So I think sort of bringing in understanding through our research, what is that gap in financing between all of these sectors? We recently had the, finance COP, and, a lot of people very unhappy with the ultimate NCQ, the new quantified climate goal, and a lot of, I think, hope that the private sector is going to bring in and mobilize a lot of financing for climate. And fill in that gap, particularly in adaptation. So I think, I think finance needs to be one of the priority areas, particularly when we do research in the sort of water, energy, food area, sort of thinking about, how can we aggregate some of our solutions so that it's attractive for finances from the private sector, particularly where there's a massive gap, and how can we support in de-risking some of these investments through the research that we do, bundling solutions. We do a lot of that in sort of disaggregated ways, I think, so sort of bringing them together to show that there is possibility for a return on investment and reduction of risk in some way, I think I would say.
Great. So thank you very much. I think that will have to be the last word because we're running out of time and we have just a couple of minutes left. So I'd like to say, first of all, I'm pleased that we had this discussion on the anniversary of the Paris Agreement. I didn't even realize it was the anniversary, but John pointed that out. So that's really great. I'd like to thank all the speakers, so Stefan, John, Darshini, and the panelists, Jianshu and Claudia, for a very stimulating conversation. I thought we had excellent presentations and excellent feedback as well from the panelists. So thank you very much for that. There will be a recording of this session. Will be put up on YouTube along with the presentations. And with that, I'd just like to say again, thank you very much, everybody. I'd like to say thanks very much to Ed, who's been working behind the scenes with Scriptoria throughout. Scriptoria have supported these talks throughout the life of Nexus Gains. So that all 29 of the talks over time, the logistics have been organised by them. As I say, this is the very last of the Nexus Gains talks. So it's a shame it's coming to an end, but we hope that next year, with the new initiative called Nexus Policy Gains, we can set up something similar, and we look forward to inviting you to discussions in the future. And so with that, I'd like to say thank you all for joining, and good night or good morning, wherever you are. Thanks a lot. Thank you to everybody. Bye.